ORF, 16th of November 2023, Chinese spies in Sri Lanka, a source of annoyance for India. China is building a navy to rule the Indian Ocean and is conducting a full-scale war against the Indian subcontinent. The primary source of contention in India's relations with Sri Lanka in recent times has been the presence of Chinese ships. China is now a significant factor in determining New Delhi's relations with the Maldives, another neighbor across the Indian Ocean. China's presence in several of India's neighboring countries, but not to the same degree and in the same context, has also consistently caused India to be concerned. The cooperation agreement inked in October 2023 and the subsequent border talks between Bhutan and China have also caused unease among specific segments of the Indian strategic community. As evidenced by King Jigme Khesar Namgyel Wangchuck's recent visit to New Delhi, where he met with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Bhutan keeps India informed. These do not include Afghanistan and Pakistan in the northwest, each with historical and contemporary ties to China. The question is whether New Delhi would have more complex and relaxed relations with each of its neighbors individually and collectively if India were to detach China from each of its neighbors. Following this path would make India a more self-assured country than it is now, or at least more so than what has been observed in the surrounding area and beyond. There are constraints to power projections that indicate India's economy will not surpass the world's third largest shortly. Unlike its fellow Quad member, the United States, US, India is not a significant producer of armaments. At least not for a while. It is not anticipated to unite and challenge China. China now possesses the largest fleet in the world, far more significant than the US, with 355 warships. India can compensate for its lack of hardware with its enormous confidence and pride in the country and stronger relationships with its neighbors. The goodwill that each of India's neighbors has, individually and collectively, is increasing. China won't be able to provoke India in its neighborhood if the latter does not respond negatively. India might draw lessons from its post-Cold War transitional experience with the United States in this context. Bilateral relations between these two countries have reached unprecedented heights compared to where they were in 1971 during the Bangladesh War. This could teach India something. It may be necessary for New Delhi to handle its bilateral ties with its neighbors without regard to China. For example, the dehyphenation of the US's India-Pakistan equations was necessary before the two countries' relations could be considered normal. Although there were other contributing reasons, nobody in either country would have predicted in the 1980s that their relationship would develop into what it is today, a comprehensive, mutually beneficial, and trustworthy relationship. From an Indian standpoint, the US's conclusion that India's accusations of cross-border terrorism against Pakistan were genuine was bolstered by the country's experiences with the Islamabad-Rawalpindi duo following 9/11. When it comes to accusing Pakistan of terrorism in bilateral interactions with Islamabad as well as in international forums, the US is leading the charge these days, surpassing even India. Other Western countries that were at best neutral about Pakistan's anti-India terror modules have recently become less so as a result of the US's presentation of the issue. In any case, people have been migrating toward India and away from Pakistan, with its numerous crises. 2 consecutively. More concerns than answers have been brought up by the Chinese research vessel, Xi'an 6, visiting Sri Lanka and conducting cooperative maritime research with onboard specialists from Sri Lanka. This is the second such Chinese visitation in a little more than a year. Only Sri Lanka and China claim to be research boats. The southernmost Hambantota port served as the berthing location for Yuanwang 5 in August 2022. Xi'an 6's docking in Colombo, in front of the media and diplomatic community in the capital, rather than at Hambantota, which China has been leasing for 99 long years, may or may not increase India's security concerns. Xi'an 6 could provide Sri Lanka with the date, time, and data gathered during the collaborative research period. Or, that's what's anticipated. However, the Sri Lankans' assertion that they have exclusive access to those data, as though China is excluded, is meaningless. It is unknown whether any Sri Lankan specialists on board the ship are experts in extracting data to distinguish between the two. Furthermore, it is unreasonable to expect China, or any other country, to allow a third nation expert to access the electronics on board. Here, dual-use technology is essential. Shiyan 6 can perform in the maritime and naval realms what Yuanwang 5 accomplished in terms of tracking satellites and missiles, among other acts of espionage. The Chinese vessels' access to data about ocean currents and other sea factors in these areas, which they can use to safely deploy their warships, and particularly their submarines, at any time of their choosing, is the source of India's fears. Colombo should be aware of the possibility that China could use this information in an adversarial military situation with India and other countries in the immediate Indian Ocean neighborhood, such as the US with its military base in Diego Garcia, even though it may not be directly impacted right now or even later. Sri Lanka should, in particular, consider the potential effects on the country's strategic security, political stability, and, more importantly, economic prosperity, which is currently still near the 2022 low, of China using the data that Colombo has now assisted it in gathering. Following President Abdullah Yamin's 2013-18 cold shouldering of the three-nation biannual maritime drills, Sri Lanka ought to consider the potential effects of the current developments on the still developing multi-nation Colombo Security Conclave, CSC, of immediate your nations, of which it is the permanent chair and of which India is a significant member. Direct advantages. There is increasing concern, particularly among the surrounding nations, that Sri Lankan ports may serve as refueling and supply stops for Chinese ships. Future Chinese threats from nearby waters, even if they do not include landed territory, could endanger other countries' security and damage India's bilateral relations. Sri Lanka declared that it had created a set of standard operating procedures, SOP, for allowing foreign warships and warplanes to utilize its territorial space in response to concerns the US and India expressed regarding Shiyan 6's visit. Before the Yuanwang 5 arrived in Hambantota, Sri Lanka asserted that they had departed from their area. Sri Lanka never once asked itself what actual or proportionate direct benefits the Chinese ship's arrival may bring to the country. Suppose China's actions resulted from political accommodation for many past and present promises. In that case, Colombo should address Indian concerns fairly and equally, considering long-term economic commitments and support. The two countries signed several memorandums of understanding, MOUs, to strengthen Sri Lanka's economic and energy security. Both suffered greatly during the crises in 2022, during President Ranil Wickremesinghe's visit to Delhi earlier this year. To follow up on them all, which were started as part of New Delhi's ever-expanding Neighbourhood First policy and accompanying projects, India should, at the very least, feel safe and secure as a nation. No obligations attached. China, however, chastised its opponents ahead of the Yuanwang 5 docking, which was purportedly for refueling and restocking. China asserted that it was completely unjustified for certain countries to cite so-called security concerns to pressure Sri Lanka, without mentioning the US or India. Beijing has let Colombo speak for itself this time. Over the past few weeks, China has been involved in bilateral negotiations. President Xi Jinping stated that no political strings are attached to Beijing's bilateral relations with Colombo during their meeting with Wickremesinghe on the fringes of the annual celebration marking the official start of China's Belt and Road Initiative in October. Chinese Vice Prime Minister Deng Xuexiang pledged his country would further develop Colombo Port City, CPC, and Hambantota Port during meetings with Wickremesinghe in Beijing. The visitor was then informed by Lu Kun, China's finance minister, that Beijing was committed to enhancing Sri Lanka's credit optimization. Even if both need more explanation, Colombo is optimistic that the successful negotiations with China to reschedule the current loans finally have enabled the country to receive approval from the International Monetary Fund to clear the second tranche of $3 billion credit. However, it is unclear how Sri Lanka will respond from an Indian and broader regional standpoint if and when Beijing pressures it to sign Xi's equally ambitious Global Security Initiative, GSI. Nepal's centre-left Prime Minister, Pushpa Kumar Dahal, sometimes known as Prakonda, recently refused to join the GSI in Beijing during the Belt and Road Initiative (BRI) decennial while accepting Chinese money and measures for development, such as a forward rail plan. If Sri Lanka could make a comparable distinction and present it clearly after the presidential elections next year, India and the region would benefit more. This is because Sri Lanka is perceived as having said far less than necessary to persuade India, which is worried about both its security and the security of the entire region. During the recent past, from Hambantota to the two Chinese ship visits, from Colombo Port City to Colombo Port's International Container Terminal, CTC. As an alternative, India should endeavour to remove the hyphen from neighbourhood equations and connections with China.